All right, moving on here, U.S. Senator Mark Warner has long been an advocate for regulation of big tech on Capitol Hill. His mission is back in the spotlight once again after a massive Twitter hack that targeted high-profile accounts brought into question whether user data is safe on these types of social platforms. I'm joined now by U.S. Senator Mark Warner from Virginia to discuss. Senator, thank you so much for joining me here today. You, of course, are the Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. With this recent enormous hack of Twitter, security experts have warned that this exposes vulnerabilities in a private company that the country's most powerful leaders rely on to communicate with the public. So what role does the federal government have in regulating these kinds of platforms?
Well, Nora, thanks for having me. And how many more of these kind of episodes do we have to have before, frankly, Congress, me and my folks I work with, do our job? My background was all in technology. I was co-founder of a company called Nextel. I was a venture capitalist. I love technology, but I also know that it can be misused and abused. And to say we're going to trust Twitter or Facebook or Google to make all their own rules for themselves just doesn't make any sense. We saw in this most recent Twitter hack the ability of hackers, and we don't know who they are yet, to come in and take over the accounts of people like Vice President Biden, President Obama, Elon Musk, a host of others, and then blast out information that to some appeared like it was coming from those people. That is an example of why we need some rules of the road. Think about it even more if there'd been what's called deep fake technology, and somebody had hacked into a Facebook account and had somebody's video image, your face come up or my face come up. You believe what you see. This could manipulate markets. It could manipulate elections. It could give out, fake health information, although that may be coming from other places in our society these days. But it's just why we need basic rules about privacy. We need, I think, basic rules around campaign elections so that there's a requirement that if you have an online ad, you have to disclose who's sponsoring that the same way that you would if you're doing an ad on television. And I think we need to realize we shouldn't be surprised. Russia did this in 2016. They interfered in our elections. They hacked information and then dumped it out. They misrepresented themselves as Americans to try to drive down Americans from participating, particularly Black Americans, trying to get them not to vote. So we've got to recognize they or others will be back in this election and in terms of manipulating our markets.
Well, Senator, you brought up Russia. There's a group called Cozy Bear, which is reportedly, exercising these ongoing cyber espionage practices against organizations working on COVID vaccines, other healthcare work as well. With that in mind, on top of the vulnerabilities exposed on Twitter, what is your biggest concern when it comes to potential foreign interference ahead of our election?
Well, let's take them in two different areas. There's basic cyber hygiene and cybersecurity. That is this Fancy Bear group, which is connected to the Russian GRU activities that appears to be trying to break into American, British, and Canadian research into COVID, to either steal information or potentially to manipulate some of the research that's going on. That will require traditional cyber hygiene, making sure you have appropriate passwords, making sure that you protect your data and information. On social media and the elections, this is an area that's kind of been the wild, wild west. For a long time, it was probably good that we had no regulation. All these platforms could emerge. But now, when foreign countries, not just Russia, could come in and hack into people's accounts and say they're Donald Trump or Joe Biden and misrepresent information, where people could come up and misrepresent themselves as Americans to try to influence an election, where you could have potential hacking into our election systems. We need to tighten up our election security, our cybersecurity. We need to have requirements that if you have a campaign ad on Facebook or on YouTube, you have the same kind of requirements of disclosure. And I think we all have a right to know what kind of information is being collected by these platforms. We ought to be able to make that data portable. So if we get tired of Facebook, we could move to a different company easily, the way you can move from one telephone company to another. There are basic rules of the road. And candidly, I think some of these companies now realize that they would like appropriate regulation, because if not, they're going to be, I think, their public is going to move away from it.
Senator, you said it might actually be a good thing that there wasn't regulation as these companies continued to flourish and grow. But if there is regulation ahead of us, does that not put some of the smaller players, the relatively new social media platforms, at a disadvantage if they are starting with regulation?
Well, when these platforms started in the late 90s, saying that they had no Facebook or Twitter or Google had no responsibility for any of their content maybe made sense. But when 2/3 of Americans get some or all their news off of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, shouldn't they have some of the same responsibilities about content that Cheddar has, that any other broadcasting network has? Why should they be able to hide behind that content prohibition or content free responsibility? And frankly, what we have now is when we have these huge companies with this much power, this much data, what's called Section 230 that gives them this immunity from any content restrictions really acts as a protector to those large companies, and the smaller startups are actually put at a disadvantage.
Well, Senator, a lot of focus obviously on Facebook because it owns a lot of the most used platforms in the entire world, but the 7th most used app is TikTok or Douyin in China. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has floated the idea of a ban of TikTok in the U.S. Are you worried about the security of TikTok and potential data sharing with its Chinese owner, ByteDance?
I am very concerned about the security on TikTok. I mean, the challenge, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Alibaba, whether it's Baidu, Tencent, these are great Chinese tech companies. They have, in a sense, almost equivalents of the Facebooks and Googles and Twitters that we have in our country. The challenge that I feel with these companies is not that their founders are bad guys or any of the bad girls, but the nature of a Chinese tech company is your first allegiance has to be to the Communist Party of China, not your shareholders. And I think the Communist Party of China uses these tech companies in a way to not only censure and surveil their own population, but we've seen them, build and use these tools in ways I think that are very threatening to, our basic ideas of freedom. And it's not just, I'm not anti-Chinese by any means. I'm anti the Communist Party of China. I actually stand with the people of Hong Kong. I think if you talk to the people of Hong Kong about the Chinese tech companies and how dependent they are on the Chinese Communist Party, they would echo these same concerns.